Hi everybody, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and I'm back today to wrap up some of the more advanced techniques using brick stitch on a frame. In a recent series of short videos, I showed you guys how to brick stitch a row of beads on the outside of a bead frame. In the second part, I showed you guys how to add a second row of beads using smaller beads in the increase technique. And then in the third part, I showed you guys how to add these little 15 O's on the inside, which they could have been any size bead. It didn't have to be 15 O's. And then over on the alluringbeadboutique.com, I'm going to wrap up this particular project and show you guys the steps I took to embellish this set of cute little earrings over there. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at doing a project something like this. So the difference between these two projects is, first of all, we're going to start out by the first row going on the inside of this larger frame. So I have two little frames here. Actually, I had four. But as you can see, these particular ones don't sit exactly flat. They're slightly domed, and it's even more noticeable on the smaller one. And once again, these are out of that same little pack of Hildy Joe connectors that I get at Joann's. The larger one is 28, and the smaller one is 16 millimeters in size. But what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you guys how to start by adding the first row of brick stitch on the inside of the frame as opposed to how we did it here on the outside. Then I'm going to show you guys how to connect, if you wanted to connect a component on the inside, like I did on this one. And I've got an older video where I showed you this once before, but I thought I'd just go ahead and do a quick redo while I'm working on the posts for this earring tutorial over on my website. As far as the materials go for this first part, this video today, where we're just going to be adding our first row of 11 O's on the inside of the frame, so we'll need some 11 O's. You'll need two of your connectors in two different sizes. And then I'm also going to be using these little teeny tiny crystal rondelles on my second row on the inside of the frame, which I'm going to show you guys how to use that to connect to the circle, the smaller circle. You're going to need some fire line or beading thread of your choice. I'm using 6-pound fire line in black satin today because it's really silky, and I love the way that it doesn't leave black stuff all over my hands. I've got roughly a wingspan and a half of thread already threaded onto a size 10 beading needle. Now to get started, we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous video. We're just going to simply tie on to the larger hoop because we're going to brick stitch onto that one first. So all I'm going to do is pass the thread through the center, and then I'm going to tie 2 overhand knots, nice and tight. And then I'm going to try to position that knot to the back side of this frame, because we'll be sewing back to front just like we did when we added the inner row of beads to this frame. So once you get that set up and you're all ready, go ahead and get your 11 O's out, and I'll show you guys how to start this out. So just like we do with any brick stitch project, for our first row, we are going to pick up 2 beads. The only occasion that I found where you don't need to pick up 2 beads on the first row is when you're doing the continuous spiral using tubular brick stitch. But because we're working, just on a regular round, and we're making our first row is going to be laying all on the same plane, we need to pick up 2 beads. You can see here I got my thread to the back side of the frame, and I've dropped those 2 beads down. All I need to do is bring my needle around to the front of the frame, and then I'm going to pass up through that second bead from the bottom to the top. I'm going to stay on the front side of the frame because I'm going to straighten up my first bead. So I'm going to just go ahead and pull that up. I'm going to make sure that everything is really close to my tail thread here, so I don't start out by creating a gap right out of the gate. Now we're on the front. You can see my threads here on the front. To straighten the bead, I'm going to come down through that first bead. I'm going to pull my thread through, and then I'm going to pass up through the second bead. But something dawned on me recently as I've been doing these videos, what I really should do is come back to the back side of the frame and then pass up through that second C bead. That way I'm going to add a second thread bridge between that first bead and the frame. And that's going to secure that bead even more so than just by passing up through the second bead. Because not only is it secured to the second bead, it's also secured to the frame now. So we're going to do it that way. And I did it when I was making my sample, and it worked out really nice. And so now my needle is back here on the back side of the frame again. I'm ready to do regular brick stitch. So I'll pick up a bead, drop it down. You can see that I bring it, the thread is in the back. I bring it around and pinch it between the frame and my finger. And then I'm on the front side of the frame again. I come up through the new bead. And I push the needle back through the center. This saves a little time. Let me show you again. I'm going to pick up a bead and let it drop down to the beadwork. I am going to hold the frame right here on my middle finger of my non-dominant hand. I'm going to pull that thread around and down, still on the back. Then I bring the needle to the front, and I pass through the bead and go to the back. That creates that thread bridge around the edge of the frame. And we're ready to keep adding beads from the back side each time. So what we'll do, since we've already been through this several times, I'm not going to make you guys watch, but what I want you to do is, as you work, I want you to make sure that your beads line up nicely beside each other and you don't have any noticeable gaps, any really loose threads at the top of your beads, thread bridges, and that if you turn your work this way, the beads are lining nicely up on the same plane as this hoop, and you don't have beads bulging out to either side. So let's do one more, and then I'll go off and finish doing this first row off camera. I'm bringing that bead down. I'm pulling the thread around the underneath, pinching it right here between the frame and my finger so it doesn't come loose. I'm coming around the front and going up to the bottom of that bead, and also going through to the back side of the frame again. Just like that. All right, I'm going to finish up adding this first little round of 11 OC beads inside my frame. Then we'll come back and we'll move on to the next step. While I'm working this first round, I did want to let you guys know that over on my website, on the AlluringBeadBoutique.com, in the corresponding blog posts related to these type of projects, any of the materials, such as these components, which are hard to find, in the blog post, I have went ahead and hunted up the link for you guys through Joann's, where you can get these little packs of components right online, so that you know that you can create these just the same as I am, if that's what you decide to do. All right, so I'm just still working on checking my work as I go, making sure that my beads sit on that plane and look really close together, and that I'm keeping my tension even so I don't have loose thread bridges at the top. So I've worked my way around, and you can see how much space I have left here on my frame. I'm going to drop this last bead down, and I'm going to do the same technique. I am going to bring it around and pull the thread from the back, position that bead. Then I am going to step up into my bead. And this time I'm going to stay on the front of the frame, because now I need to connect the first bead to the last bead. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I've got room for this bead in here. I don't want this all overcrowded. So you can see that it's trying to crowd just a little bit. So let me show you how to work this little bit of magic here. What I want you to do is I want you to take your fingers, and you can slide these thread bridges a little bit closer together along the frame to create just a little bit more space for that bead to sit in. I knew my bead was going to fit in there. If it's really drastic, you would probably want to just pull that bead off and connect the previous bead to the first bead. On this type of project, overcrowding really makes the beadwork look so much worse and unprofessional. So that's the goal, is to try to not to overcrowd the beads that are sitting on the base here. All right, so now I'm on the front side of this frame. Here's my working thread. I'm exiting that last bead. We are going to close this beadwork, so we have to put a thread bridge between that last bead and the first bead on top. So we'll just pass down through the very first bead. And we've done this before in all of the previous brick stitch on a frame lessons. So now I want to come up through the bottom of my second bead. But at the same time, I want to come under the frame. So I'm going to come from the back side, and I'm going to go back up through that last bead. You can see here that I've put my needle on the back, and I'm going up through the back. So this is going to create that thread bridge once again here on the outside of the frame, and secure the bead not only to the first bead, but also secure the first bead to the frame. Now we're going to work on connecting our center component into the first rows of beadwork that we just created. For this step, I am going to work from front to back. So let me bring my thread around through the center of the hoop to the front side of this frame. I am going to pick up one of my rondelles and drop it down. And I'm going to let that come to rest right there on the CB where my thread is exiting. I'm going to then pick up my little component. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to push it through the center of the smaller ring. And it's sitting right inside the bigger one, you can see. I'm going to bring, now my thread is in the back, I'm going to come between the outside edge of the little frame and the inside edge of my existing beadwork. Get that tail thread out of the way so I can show you what's happening. So now here's my thread. I'm going to come back down through that rondelle. And I'm going to pull and snug that bead and that frame up to my existing base row of 11 O's. Then I am going to take my needle. It doesn't matter if it flops around here for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come right back down through that same 11 O on the base where my thread was exiting initially. And this time when I pull it through, it's going to bring that all together for me and make it a lot easier to hold into place like that. Then I am going to come up through, I'll be sewing clockwise here. I'm going to come up through the seed bead to the left. And it doesn't matter if you want to sew the other way, that is perfectly fine. Now we're back here on the front side of the frame with our working thread, and we just pick us up another one of our little rondelles. We're going to let it drop down into position here. Then we're going to pass our needle straight through the center of our smallest frame. We're going to come back up between the frames right here. You can kind of drag your thread around so it sits nice and close to your little rondelle. Now we're back here on the front, so we're going to come down through that rondelle we just put on, and we can come through the 11 O right beneath it. But because we're working in a circle, sometimes it's easier to see which 11 O you want to go through by coming through the rondelle first. Because we're working around in a circle, we're not going to get as many of these rondelles into between these two frames as we did 11 O's on the base row. At some point, we're going to have to do some, do some increasing. So we can either decide whether we need to come down through the third 11 O seed bead or go through the second one. I'm just going to go ahead and go through that third one because I'm working around in a circle and I don't want my rondelles overcrowded either. So now that I'm sitting here and I'm coming out of this 11 O right here, I am going to pass up through the next 11 O and stay on the front of both of my frames. And pick up my next rondelle. We're going to drop it into place. We're going to go through the center of the small frame. And it's best to pull your threads all the way through. And then come in between the two frames again. And we're going to come down that new rondelle. And then we're going to come down through our seed bead. I'm going to come down through the same seed bead I came up through, so I'm coming through that third one again. But I want to make sure that I don't cross over my thread bridge here to the back. I want to stay on the front. Right here. You see, we just put a thread bridge between the 11-0 and the rondelle. We want to stay on the top side of that thread bridge, if we can. You can see that this 11-0, if I pass right up through that 11-0, I'm going to start crowding these rondelles on top of each other. So I'm exiting from this 11-0 seed bead. I'm going to skip one and go up the next one. And stay on the front of both frames. And then I'm going to pick up another crystal. I'm going to come through the center, come back through between the two frames. That's the easiest way I know to do it. And then we'll sew down through the crystal rondelle and the seed bead below. Pull straight out. And that looks really nice. Here I'm probably just going to sew up the very next seed bead. So I'm ready to pick up my crystal. I'm on the front side of my beadwork and I'm exiting the top of one of my 11-0s, so I know it's time to pick up. We are going to come through the center of the small one. Then we're going to come in between the two frames again. Excuse me. Then I'm going to come down my rondelle this time, and then I'll figure out which 11-0 afterwards. So now I can see that I'm coming out of the bottom of my rondelle. I don't know if you can tell exactly which 11-0 I came out of, but it was this one. I'm going to come down through the next 11-0 instead. And then I can step up into the next one. And I'm just going to keep doing this, and if I make a mistake, I just simply need to take the rondelle off, position my needle correctly, and just, change which 11-0 I decide to go through before I add the crystal rondelle. I'm going to come back between the frame. Makes it a lot easier to sew down the front of your rondelle and the seed bead below. So I'm going to go back through that same 11-0. Now, I'm probably going to have to go, if I come up through this 11-0 right next to them, exiting here. If I come up this one, I'm going to overcrowd my work. So I'm going to come up, skip one, and go through that next 11-0 right there. And then I'm going to pick up my crystal and repeat the same steps we've been doing. Come through the center of the smallest component. Come between the two frames. And when we get towards the end of this, it's really going to be very important to come between the two frames before you try to sew down. And then I could come through the two beads right there from the front side. And pull everything into position. And that's how I'm going to work the rest of the way around this bead frame. I'm trying to decide if that's where I really want to go. Let me just pull it up here and drop a bead down. Sometimes you have to do trial and error before you can tell if your crystals are going to overcrowd. I can be safe with that one, but I'm definitely going to do an increase on my next bead. So I'll go right through that frame, come back between the frames. And then I'm going to come down my crystal, and I am going to come down the seed bead. This time I am going to skip a seed bead and come up through the next one, staying on the front of the frame here. Staying on the front of both frames. Alright, so I won't make you guys sit here and watch this whole thing. We've already done several. Just take your time. If you see one that is crowding and you don't like the look of it, take your needle off your thread, remove that bead, and then rethread, obviously, and reposition into the next seed bead. Or if you've created too big of a gap, you might want to reposition into a previous seed bead. So I am almost done with connecting my little smaller component on the inside, and it looks really pretty. I've worked really hard not to overcrowd my crystal rondelles. Because these little components I'm using today are kind of domed, look at how cute the beadwork looks. So you can turn it up here to make sure that everything's kind of staying on plane. And it looks pretty neat. So I'm going to drop down this 18th rondelle. You can see I've got a pretty good size gap here, but I know good and well that I'm not going to fit 2 rondelles on their side like that without seriously overcrowding the beadwork. So before I stitch that bead into place, I can take my fingernail and I can position these rondelles using these little thread bridges, and I can slide them towards each other or away from each other to kind of either tighten the beads up closer together, this way to fit in too, or I can bring them this way and work them towards each other and just fit in this last bead, which that's what I'm going to do. I used 18 on my first one. I'm going to use 18 on this one. So here I am, and I've got my bead positioned. I'm going to come right through the center, just like we've been doing. Pull that around. And I'm going to come between the 2 beads here on my frame, the first and the last. Pull that through. And I'm going to have to get my tail thread out, so let's get that out of the way. I don't want to catch your tail thread. Now I'm going to come down through that crystal rondelle, just the rondelle. And make sure I didn't get too far out of the whack here. So now that I'm sitting here, I am going to skip over to this seed bead. Not coming down through the one that I added my rondelle to. I'm skipping over a couple, just to pull that beadwork even further towards that first bead, like that. Now I'm going to come up through that next seed bead right here, sitting right to the left, because I'm sewing clockwise, remember. Now I'm going to come up through my first crystal right here. And all this I'm doing is on the front side of the frame. So now here I sit on the front side of my frame. Now I'm going to come down through the last crystal from top to bottom and connect those 2 crystals together. You can see how by taking those little steps it pulled those beads sitting perfectly together. And now I'm going to come up through that first crystal one more time. I'm not using the seed beads, just the crystals. Still on the top. I'm going to put a thread bridge there. And that further tightens those beads together so that really looks really nice. So now I'm exiting from the top of the crystal. I am just going to come down through a crystal on the right or the left, it doesn't matter. And then also through the seed bead below. Just to work towards the outside edge of the frame there. Now, had I wanted to, I could have stayed right up here at the center, and I could have went ahead and done a row of brick stitch on the inside edge of this frame. But I kind of like the look that I have here so far, and so that's why I want to sew on to the outside edge, because then I'm going to do my embellishments that I did here, and then come back up to the top and put a bail for a jump ring to make a pair of earrings. So that is it for today. So the things that we learned today were how to begin our first row on the inside edge of a bead frame. We learned how to connect a separate concentric component in the center. So we have two frames in actuality. We have this smaller one inside of this larger one. And we've learned how to position our thread bridges along these frames in case we need to make adjustments. It's actually a decrease. I don't know why I've said increase this entire video. What we were doing was a decrease. Oh man, some days if you want to head over to the blog, I'll try to have it correct over there when I write all of this up. But we were actually doing a decrease because we were working from the out in. All right. Over on my website, there will be a separate post on how to embellish and create this gorgeous little earring from our bead weaving using two concentric bead frames today. That's going to wrap up my brick stitch tutorials where as far as bead weaving 101 goes. The next thing we're going to go into is herringbone stitch. And as we work through that stitch and get into some of the more advanced techniques using herringbone, I do have a couple of ideas to show you guys how to do some herringbone work on a bead frame also. So you have that to look forward to later in May or the 1st of June. I'm not sure how long it'll take me to get through the herringbone at this point because I'm still working on closing out brick stitch. All right, that's it for today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure you head over to the AlluringBeadBoutique.com and check out the tutorials on creating the earrings with the brick stitch on a pearl or on a bead. The tutorial that we learned to do brick stitch on the frame here for increasing the outside edge. And then how we learned to decrease working inwards as we added this cute little second frame in the center of our beautiful little component. All right, guys, have a great day. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that like button. See you next time.